They're more able to see that what everyone has to offer and bring to the table. They're intelligent. They're more calm, I think, than my generation was when we were their age. They're more careful. I guess you can't help but have hope that when they're taking over, things will be better.
It gives me hope that you have hope. For some reason, I feel like it's going to work itself out. I don't think it's going to necessarily be doomsday apocalypse, but I am losing a little bit of hope every day.
My name is Linda Lorelle, and I'm asking you to have the courage to listen with an open mind to all of our voices, because our voices matter. Hi, everybody. It's Linda Lorelle, and this is Our Voices Matter Across the Generations. As we continue this series, today I get a chance to sit down with a member of the OVM team and the Linda Lorelle Media team. My guest is Jodi Rabitoy, my assistant, and her daughter, Colette Rabitoy. So Jodi started working with me about 3 years ago, right around the time that we launched Our Voices Matter. And we've had numerous conversations, as you might imagine, through the years about our guests and the topics and what we're both learning as we go through this process together. And once we hit upon the idea of doing this series where we are amplifying the voices of Gen Z and Millennials, I said, do you think that you and Colette would like to come on the podcast and have a conversation? And she said, absolutely. So I can tell you that Colette works in architecture. And as I said, Jodi works with me. And before that, she was an educator. So really interesting to hear their perspectives on the world that we live in today and what the future looks like. So here we go. Okay, Jodi and Colette, it is so great to have you on Our Voices Matter. This is really, really, really fun to have an Across the Generations episode with the two of you. And welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
So, okay, full disclosure for everybody who's out there listening and watching. Jodi works for Lorelle Media, for Linda Lorelle Media. And we've been working together, for, it's been 3 years, right?
It has been, yeah.
It's been 3 years. And so, Jodi, you're very much involved in the podcast production and all of the work that we've been doing. And of course, Colette is your daughter. And Colette, you are an architect, correct?
Technically, no, but I do work with architecture, yes.
You work with architecture. So tell me what you do in the architecture world.
So I'm at a residential firm, and we build houses primarily in River Oaks, kind of that area of Houston.
Okay.
And we do larger scale houses, like 5,000 square foot and up. And it's really fun. I've learned a lot. I've been here for about 2.5 years now, and I'm still learning every day.
Yes. Really that's the main thing. We're all still learning every day, no matter where we are and what we're doing. Hopefully we're still learning something. And I have to say that doing this series Across the Generations is a real learning experience for me. And part of the reason that I wanted to do this is because I feel like people of your mom's generation and of my generation don't always understand how your generation thinks. So are you millennial or Gen Z? Where do you fall in the spectrum?
I'm 1996, so okay. I've been told I'm in between.
You're kind of on the cusp, but you're young. You're a young person. You're a young person, so you can represent both demographics. And so I just am wanting to learn more about how you view the world, how your generation is viewing the world, and seeking some of the solutions to problems that our generations have left you with. So before we kind of dive into that aspect of it, Jodi, I'm going to start with you because when I asked you to be on the podcast, you were really surprised. And I want to know, as somebody who has been integrally involved with the process of us putting the podcast together. And you have watched every single interview that has been done over the last 3 years. What has surprised you most, and what have you learned from listening to our guests?
Wow. what surprised me the most is how much I have in common with people that I wouldn't have thought I had anything in common with. You know, how many similarities there are in all different lifestyles and all different age groups and all different, you know, people who have different kinds of jobs or different upbringings. They all seem to want the same kinds of things that I want, or, you know, have the similar goals to what I have. And so I guess that's what surprised me the most, just how much we all have in common.
That makes me feel so good, because that is the whole point of the podcast, is that people would have that kind of an epiphany. It's like, oh, I have nothing in common with that person's background, but there is so much that I do have in common with them. Colette, I saw you shaking your head in agreement. Do you agree with your mom's assessment? And I know you also have watched a lot of the interviews.
Yes.
Do you agree with her? And what has surprised you listening?
I agree. I think mostly like she said, different perspectives and everything, but how similar I am with people who have different political views. I find that really interesting when you hear the opposite side of the spectrum talking, and I can relate to them. I didn't expect that at all. So it is really nice and refreshing to hear things from them. Yeah.
Wow. So when you talk about politics, since you just brought that up, when you talk about politics among your peer group, what are those conversations like?
We kind of all are in agreement that it's too much. Like it's overwhelming for us personally, because there's a lot of emotion and a lot of conflicting views. And so in my group of friends, we typically just reaffirm everything that each other is saying. We're like, oh yeah, that's dumb, or oh yeah, we should be doing this. That's kind of how it goes personally.
So when you say that it's overwhelming, do you mean politics itself in general is overwhelming, or talking about it among yourselves is overwhelming? Is there a difference there?
Yeah, I think talking about it is overwhelming, because you never know which way or how the room's mood is going to change when you bring it up, you know, and it's really easy to get overworked, I feel, because there's situations that everyone has strong feelings about, and you can easily kind of either get worked up into anger, or it's just a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot. Have you found any tools that are useful in trying to dissipate that kind of anger in a conversation? I mean, have you found something that works where you're able to perhaps meet someone whose political views are different than your own, meet them halfway, or listen to them in a different way? Or have you found anything that seems to work for you?
Yes, meeting people halfway usually works pretty well. And usually everyone's willing to go there to meet halfway, but every once in a while, if they aren't willing, then I've just kind of changed the subject, make a joke, move on to something else. But yeah, usually we can meet halfway. There's a lot of things that people can agree on.
Well, that's really encouraging to hear. Jodi, do you feel the same way that Colette does when it comes to talking about politics among your friend group? What is that experience like for you?
You know, a lot of the people in my friend group have similar ideas and positions on things politically. So it's not as difficult for me to have a conversation. We just, we agree already. So we're kind of in a bubble, and we're not, it's not a difficult conversation. We all just gang up on the other side, It's pretty rare for me to have a conversation with someone who has completely different ideas than me. And when I do, it's uncomfortable. It's, I don't know how far to take it. I tend to shut down, try to change the subject, because sometimes it's so different that I just can't imagine how someone would arrive at that opinion. And there's a distance then between me and the other person. And that's uncomfortable. So yeah, when that does happen, it's typically that just stop talking politically about and change the subject to something lighter,
Yeah. I think we've all felt that, been there, been in that really uncomfortable place where it's like, what do I say? How do I respond to this person? I just, I think they're from another planet for believing this. And it's hard. I think one of the things that we try to do on the podcast is to, I guess, create an opportunity for those kinds of difficult conversations to happen in the wake of having watched or listened to one of our conversations. And you've shared with me, Jodi, that sometimes watching something that we've produced has caused you to think about things in a different way, or that sometimes your friends might respond in a way to one of our interviews that was surprising to you. So can you talk to me a little bit about that dynamic and what you have personally learned from being kind of on both sides of it, if you will?
Well, we had an episode that had a sports star that I knew that my brother kind of worshiped growing up. And I thought this might be a good opportunity to start a conversation with him, and share my work with him and say, hey, look, we have this person on the podcast. And, I didn't have political motivation behind it. I just thought, I thought of you because, we're interviewing this person and you did similar things that this sports star did as we were growing up. And it really made me think of you. And, but he didn't, he thought it was political. He took it as a political, he watched the same episode that I did, but he thought that I was kind of pushing an agenda or something like that. So it ended up being, a confrontational conversation between the two of us that really,
so interesting.
I didn't really feel like we got to a resolution on or an understanding in. I feel like we got to a place where we could speak, but we were dodging, the issue after that.
Yeah. So your intention of introducing him to this particular episode was one of, hey, I think, you might really enjoy this because this is somebody that you grew up watching or whatever, and you have something in common. And hey, isn't it cool that we interviewed him? Right. And when he watched it, he took it as more that you were trying to push a political agenda, or that the show itself was trying to push a political agenda?
Well, I guess the show, and therefore me, because I'm pushing the show on him in that way, and I really, the show didn't have anything political in my mind. I didn't, there were conversations about this sports star's life and that kind of thing, and definitely challenges that he faced. And of course, but I didn't anticipate it at all. Yeah. I just didn't see it coming.
Yeah. So we need to just tell people what this episode is, because now they're going to want to go see what it is. Yeah. It was the episode with Warren Moon and James Lofton. James played for the Green Bay Packers, and Warren played for the Houston Oilers and some other teams in Canada and whatnot. And they are both friends of mine. And so it was a really interesting, fascinating, fun episode for me to do. But it's so interesting to hear how people can take what is being said. And obviously we're all filtering things through our own lens. And what you heard and what he heard were two totally different things. Does that surprise you, Colette? That dynamic, is that something that is surprising to you, or do you find that that's the same in your circle?
That's a little more extreme than in my circle, I would say.
Really?
People don't typically try to make things political. We kind of actively avoid it. So yeah, that is a bit different of a dynamic.
Wow. Okay. So, Colette, when you think about your future, I'm going to ask you kind of a kitschy question here. So when you think about your future, what 3 words instantly come to mind?
Climate, climate change. What else? That's kind of the only thing on my mind. When I think of my future, I just think about what is it going to be like on the planet to live. Yeah.
Yeah, it's frightening. It's really frightening to think about that. So how is that thought always being I was going to say at the back, but at the forefront of your mind? How is that informing the way that you are making decisions about what your life is going to look like as you progress through it?
Well, it's tough because if you have this kind of pessimistic view in everything you do, it's a little hard to stay motivated to make decisions towards your future, because sometimes I feel like, oh, is this really going to matter in 20 years when we're all like underwater? Or it makes it difficult to do things and really think about the lasting impact. But I do typically think if there's ways that I can help solve like what's going on in the world or any kind of issues, it's really hard to pull out a positive response to that for me. So it's really kind of tainted my vision of my future.
Yeah. And Jodi, how does that make you feel as a mom when you hear that?
Well, Colette and I have had conversations about, whether or not she wants to bring children into the world. And she's mentioned before that she doesn't think the world is a place, she doesn't see that for herself. And I guess I think, I don't know if there's a better way to look at whether or not we've done our job as a generation in leaving a good place for our children than, kind of that statement where you're worrying if the earth will support you and your children. I feel that we've let them down. I feel that we haven't made the world better for them, that we've, kind of wasted resources and we haven't, passed on something that is good for them.
Do you feel like we've let you down, Colette? Your generation? I mean, honesty, really. I don't want you to sugarcoat it. I mean, what do you think? I mean, have we let you down?
I think so. I do feel a little bit let down because it's all stuff that could have been prevented, if we did conserve resources and just did things a little bit differently. But I don't really have all that harsh of feelings about it. It doesn't seem like anyone's individual thought or fault. But I do think we've been a little let down. Yeah. Yeah.
So what's your message to people of our generations? What's your message to us?
I think a lot of times people will look at my generation and say that we are lazy or we don't want to work, and we don't have any drive. And I want them to know that it's not laziness, it's lack of devotion. Like there's a lot that we're faced with, and it's hard to stay focused at work or want to do things when you've just got a lot on your mind about the future and climate change. And
you're dealing with existential questions, and they're so big that it can very easily overwhelm you to the point where you're unable to focus on the task at hand or the job at hand. And so if I'm hearing you correctly, I think what I'm hearing you say is that we older people need to understand the enormity of what you as a generation are facing and trying to live your day-to-day lives with this thing, this cloud literally hanging over your head that says, all of this may or may not exist in X number of years. And that's a lot.
It is a lot. And it's also hard for people to want to work for peanuts, I guess. Like, if you're working a minimum wage job, you're most likely not making enough money to support yourself and rent and your phone bill and all of those things. It's just not enough. So why work if you work and it's still not even going to be enough for you? I think that's a big problem too. Like, what is the point of working and doing all of this when it's not going to get you where you need to be? So I think that's confused with laziness a lot.
Such an interesting point. So that gets to the core of our economy and the economics of how this country works or doesn't work, and the inability of our lawmakers to grapple with any of these huge issues that are facing us because they can't get together to actually pass legislation that would make the kind of difference that you're talking about. Jodi, what are your thoughts about this? When you hear Colette saying, it's not that we're lazy. It's, we've got all of this stuff that is just kind of looming there. Mm-hmm. It's very different for them than it was for us.
It is. It's harder for them. I mean, I've seen it. I've seen my kids struggle. Colette struggled to buy a house when she was much better prepared than I was when I first bought a house. She had done a better job saving. She had done a better job in school and had, landed herself a job that paid more than mine did at the time. And she was prepared in all the ways I wasn't. And I was able to buy a house. And I mean, she did too eventually, but the struggle and the cost compared to her salary and, it's definitely more difficult for them than it was for me. And I've been at parties where people my age or a little bit older say things like, if they just didn't have Starbucks so often, or if they, the whole avocado toast thing. And I just think that is not at all how either one of my kids was. They worked all through college. They just weren't the thing I keep hearing everyone say that people their age are. They just weren't that at all. They really, really worked, and they're doing well. My kids are doing well. But it takes so much more than it did when I was their age and I was, attempting to do what they're attempting now. It takes so much more.
So same kitschy question for you. When you think about the future, what 3 words come to mind for you?
Well, for me, it's there are so many problems now that I don't feel like we're finding solutions for. And from my perspective, it seems like we have the same kinds of people in charge making decisions and in leadership roles where it really counts. And we're not listening to the perspective of everyone. And so for me, it's really diversity or nonconformity that is going to be the thing that finds us the solutions we need in our society. It's the talents and the perspectives and the interests of all different kinds of people that can help us solve the problems instead of this small, tight group of people with all the same perspectives and talents. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's maybe diversity or nonconformity or, that's what it's going to take in my mind.
Wow. I completely agree with you. And I love the way that you phrased that. And it made me think of this next question for you, Colette, which is, do you ever see yourself or have any of your friends talked about going into politics to help affect some of the change that is needed? Or do you find that you feel it would be more helpful to work toward those solutions from outside of the political system itself, because obviously activists have created much of the change that this country has seen, in its history. I'm curious, do you and your friends ever talk about what and how you as a group can help change our situation?
We do talk about that because a lot of the time when that comes up, of course, you say, okay, well, what can we do to fix this? It's our job now to fix it. And I think we've all kind of come to the understanding, or in our own opinion, our understanding that if you go into politics, all of your effort seems to just get tangled up in arguments about something totally different. And it doesn't seem like you effectively get anything done if once you're in politics, like it's just a battle against one or the other. And I do think that activism is probably the most effective in our generation's case, because we have, social media, and we can get the words out to everyone around the world. And it's just a way more open playing field than trying to narrow yourself down into a political party. And yeah.
Well, the system itself is horribly broken. I mean, I think every day we're seeing more evidence of that. Are you and your friends actively involved in helping to move forward on certain causes?
I wouldn't say we are. I'd like to be personally, but it does seem like, working a full-time job kind of prevents you from being able to do that. Mm-hmm. There's not really enough time left for you to go to like a women's march or anything like that. There's also kind of a stigma against activists and Gen Z specifically, that they're like, cultural warriors and stuff like that. So it's a little intimidating to try and go out and speak up. Even though that is the best course of action we can take, it's still a very difficult one to do.
Mm. So Jodi, you talked about diversity just a moment ago and the importance of making sure that all voices are at the table as decisions are being made. And you and I have had conversations about race in the time that we've been working together, because it's a topic that we obviously touch upon on the podcast. And it's such an integral part of every aspect of life in America, even those who don't want to talk about it. So I guess I have a couple questions. In your time, in the time that you've been working with me over these 3 years, because you started working right around the time we launched the podcast, what have you learned about race in America? And what, if anything, has, I don't want to say changed your mind, or just what do you believe today versus what you believed 3 years ago? Is there any difference or any change there based upon some of the conversations that you've heard and the things that you've been exposed to that you were not previously exposed to before we started working together?
Well, what comes to mind is I was kind of unaware of how much, I guess I had the assumption that if you were educated or had money, that it didn't really matter what color your skin was, that people accepted you, that you didn't run into racism. And I think I also was sheltered to how many people are, that aren't white, are successful and are leaders in industry and business owners. And I feel like the message to me was always, well, we can't hire anyone who's, not white because there just are no qualified candidates, or there are no, and, I don't know that I believe that was true, but certainly when, I started working for you and having, new experiences and learning about different industries and different clients that we work with. And I mean, it's just absolutely not true. It's just, absolutely not true in any sense. So, And of course, it's been heartbreaking for me to learn how much racism that even successful, educated, wealthy people face. I guess I thought that was a thing of the past. And, so I've had to come to terms with the fact that it's an everyday situation for anyone who isn't white. And I just didn't think that was happening anymore. I really didn't. I just wasn't exposed to it. I had no idea. So even now it's emotional for me because I'm ashamed of myself for not knowing that was a thing.
Okay, I'm going to stop you because there's no shame here. Okay. You should not feel shame in not knowing something that you have never been exposed to. So I'm not going to let you put that on yourself. Okay. It's a question of educating ourselves and opening ourselves up to groups of people and schools of thought, and just being able to understand that, not everybody is just like we are, but we're all deserving of the same love and respect as the next person. And so please don't say that there's shame in there's no shame in not knowing. There really isn't. But because, it's like Maya Angelou always says, when you know better, you do better.
Right.
So, so now you know. So then the question,
I don't necessarily know what to do though,
Well, that's going to be my next question. Okay. So now that you know, then the next thing is when you are in those situations where this subject matter comes up and someone says what you used to believe because you didn't know any better, but now you do, that's what you do is you speak up.
And I am doing that now.
Yes.
In little ways, wherever I can, I say that. And I just being armed with the knowledge is helpful. If someone says, well, we didn't have any female applicants, so I had to hire a male. And, I can say things like, well, I know they're out there. I wonder why they're not applying at your company.
Right.
I mean, that doesn't sound like a them problem. It sounds like a you problem.
Like a you problem.
Exactly. So just having that knowledge is helpful so that I can speak up. But I can't help but look back and think of all the missed opportunities where I could have said something, because I know it takes a lot of times for people who believe something to hear from people in a lot of different ways and a lot of different times in order to realize something or change their mind about something.
Exactly. And that self-reflection is a good thing, but just take the shame piece out of it. Okay. I'm not going to let you do that to yourself. So Colette, when you hear your mom say that, I could see that a lot of this is resonating with you. So what are your thoughts about this?
I feel very similarly. I wasn't exposed to racism much as a kid because I am white. And so it didn't happen to me. But I would say probably 2020, when we were all locked down and on our phones and just watching what's happening in the world and seeing videos and George Floyd, that's when the realization kind of hit that, no, that's not history. That's still happening. And just because I'm not seeing it doesn't mean it's not happening. And I think I think differently now because of that.
Yeah. That's, you made a really, really important point. Just because you're not seeing it doesn't mean that it's not happening. And I would add to that when people tell you what their lived experience is, believe them. It's not just something that's made up. We all know what our individual experiences are. So I guess my last couple questions are more future looking. And I want to know, so for you, Colette, are you hopeful about your future? I know, we've talked about some pretty heavy things here, and I know that it's a challenging time for the world, but I will say that in the conversations that I've been having with people of your generation and really of all generations, what gives me hope for the future, me personally, is your generation. Talking to young people like you, talking to young people like my daughter, and others who are looking at the world in a holistic way and trying to connect all of it and trying to help all of us see and understand the connections. That gives me hope for the future. So I'm looking to you, I'm looking to you and your peers as our hope. Do you feel that sense of hope?
It gives me hope that you have hope. For some reason, I feel like it's going to work itself out. I don't think it's going to necessarily be doomsday apocalypse, but I am losing a little bit of hope every day, I think, because each additional thing that's happening, it just brings you down a little bit lower. Like, oh, there's another mass shooting. Like, oh, I can't differentiate now between the mass shootings. It's not a good look. It's not a good outlook, really. I'd say there's still hope, but it's diminishing.
And when you say every day it gets a little bit bleaker, what would it take to stop that pattern of it looking bleaker? What would it take to say, oh, here's something that gives me hope?
I think good news. When I open the news app and I see something good happening, that will increase my hope.
Okay. And Jodi, same question for you.
I mean, it's the young people that give me hope. It's, I hate to say it like this, but it's that the people I talk to at parties who just think the new generation is lazy or drink too much Starbucks, it's the knowledge that they're getting older and it's becoming irrelevant what they have to say, and talking to young people and they're more accepting of differences. They're more able to see that what everyone has to offer and bring to the table. They're intelligent. They're more calm, I think, than my generation was when we were their age. They're more careful. You can't help but have hope that when they're taking over, things will be better.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I certainly do. I do have that hope. I have to hold on to it. Mm-hmm. And, having conversations like this, really, really give me hope, because I think we just have to be honest and just put it all out there, put it all out on the table. Cause it's like you said at the very beginning, Jodi, we all want the same thing. Mm-hmm. We all want the same thing when you get right down to it. This has been great. I have really enjoyed this conversation so much. So I do have to give you an opportunity to switch it up, and you get to ask me a question if you'd like to. Don't have to, but if you've got one, go for it.
Colette, you had a good one. We talked about it before.
Okay.
Yeah. I want to know what your strategy is when you are made to feel other or less than in life. Like, do you have something you say to those people, or do you internalize it? What's your game plan?
Wow. I think the answer to that depends on what the situation is. It's hard, of course, not to be emotional in the moment, but I think that in general terms, when I'm feeling that someone is looking at me as less than, I probably would turn it back on them and ask a question that would elicit the kind of answer that basically points the light in their direction so that they see what they're doing. It's tough. It's really tough. And, the bottom line is we are all made to feel like the other at some point in our lives for whatever reason. And I think that asking questions and listening to what the person is saying, and then trying to turn it back in their direction works for me in many instances. But, it's a difficult thing to do. But I think the bottom line is what I just said a moment ago, which is, I want the same thing out of life that you do. And I'm not the boogeyman. I'm not any different than you are. I was reading an article just the other day about, I think, what is it? There's a genetics organization. I can't think of the name of it, but it's like an organization that has all the top geneticists in the world. And this organization has made a public apology for the first time about its research through the years that has been used to feed into the narrative that anyone who is not white is less than. And the science says that 99.9% of all humans come from the same genetic makeup. And in fact, race is a social construct. We created that. Mm-hmm. It's not in our DNA. Our DNA says we're all the same. Genetically, we are all the same. But we are the ones who've created these divisions. We're the ones who've decided that we have these structures that allow us to otherize each other. So, when you look at it like that, it's just, I'm a human, you're a human. Let's let each other live, and let's treat each other with love and respect. So, well, my dears, this has been wonderful. Thank you both so much. I am so excited to get this conversation out there, and really appreciate having a chance to get to know you a little bit better, Colette. And Jodi, you know how much I love you, and I love working with you and having you on the team. And your perspective, both of you, has been really, really wonderful and eye-opening. And I appreciate you taking the time to share it.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Thanks for letting me show off my daughter, Colette.
Of course. How lucky am I to have Jodi on my team? A big thanks to Jodi and Colette for sharing their very thoughtful perspectives on the world that we live in today and what we can all do to make it a little bit better and a little bit brighter for all of us. Thank you for giving them permission to speak and for having the courage to listen with an open mind. If you've not already subscribed, please do so, like, share, and then join us for the next episode of Our Voices Matter. Take care.